Mercy desperately needs a rework. She's been broken for far too long, and here's why. Pocketing your DPS is broken, and now we all know that the best way to play Mercy is to pocket your DPS, and this makes it no fun for the Mercy player or for the DPS that have to face that pocketed Pharah, Soldier, Echo, Sojourn, and so on. And why is that? Well, for the Mercy player, she just has to sit behind cover while following her DPS around all game and damage boosting them, of course waiting for heal them whenever they start to take damage. And if her DPS happens to get picks, she literally just hits E behind a wall, and she can do that once every single fight because Mercy's res is on a 30-second cooldown, and most fights usually last 20 to 30 seconds, and then you got to think about the 10-second respawn timer and so on. And that's just straight up unfun and uninteractive gameplay for both sides. And now for the point of view from the enemy team and DPS that have to go against that Mercy pocket. Let me start by prefacing a pocketed DPS is virtually unkillable without a one tap or the perfect dive. And so let's say you hit a really difficult headshot on an 80-80 strafing soldier, and you feel very relieved that you got the kill and finally feel like you have the advantage. Well, slow down there. In reality, you only have the advantage for about 2 to 3 seconds until Mercy hits E behind a wall, and you can't do a damn thing about it. And back to my point earlier, she can do that every single fight because the cooldown's only 30 seconds. And some of you may say, well, Scuffsy, you can dive them and hold that space to stop the Mercy from being able to res them. And yes, you're right, but here's my counter to that. How often do you see a team that can perfect a dive in matchmaking? In my top 500 in GM lobbies, it's honestly like a third of the time that we actually perfect dives and even have comms in my games. So I can't imagine how infrequent it happens in low GM or Masters. And I don't even want to talk about Diamond or low. Is that even a thing there? And even outside of that, you're going to have to hold the space for the entire 10 seconds while the player is respawning, even longer if it's in overtime. Like guys, why can't it just be a standard amount of time, like 3-5 seconds or something, so that there's a lot more counterplay around it? And last note for this point, Mercy carries games by enabling her DPS. And let's just think about if there's 2 equally skilled Soldier 76s, one on each side, with one having a Mercy pocket, who do you think is going to win that fight? Ding ding ding, you guessed it, the Mercy pocketed Soldier every single time. A DPS with a pocket Mercy is just flat out unkillable without that one shot, and it forces you to not take the 1v1 into that DPS, which in turn gives both of them free roam to take space and go wherever they want on the flank, which in turn forces you to play back and gives the team with the Mercy yet another advantage, as if the previous stated weren't enough. And yes, you don't have to fight the DPS that's being pocketed, but if you don't put any kind of pressure on them, they're going to be able to roam the map for free wherever they want, and they're just going to be running over your backline the entire game. Now, reason number 2, res is overpowered. Res is OP. And I say that because the biggest sign of which team is going to win the team fight is the team that gets the first pick. And this stat comes straight to us from Overwatch League. When an Overwatch League team wins the first elimination in a team fight, they've gone on to win that team fight 81% of the time on average. And that stat was from Overwatch 1 when there used to be 6 players on each team. It matters even more now that there's 5 on each. And so Mercy Res straight up removes that 80% chance you were going to win that team fight with the push of a button through a wall. And that's especially a problem for hitscan DPS like Ashe, Widow, and so on, because you're not going to have the ability to go behind that wall unless you want to put yourself out of position and kill yourself trying to stop the res. And that leaves us with the only real way to consistently cancel a res, which is crowd control like Pharah Boop, Doom Punch, Lucio Boop, and so on. And honestly, that's not even really consistent. And so, not only does that cancel out the 80% chance you're going to win that fight, she also does it from the safety of cover, through a wall with her feet kicked back on the couch drinking her goddamn mimosa. But let's say you're on a dive hero like Genji or Tracer and get a pick on that pocketed DPS. Well, she can just be pocketed by the other support through the res, or get hit with a Bell by Kiri, bubbled by Zarya, Matrix by D.Va, and so on. And now, lastly, Mercy can res for the entirety that her teammate is respawning. Usually that's 10 seconds flat, but with overtime spawns delaying that, it can go up to 15, even 16 seconds, and then you have to hold the res for that entire time. And for the players who didn't play Overwatch 1, check out these reses. Mercy used to have a mass res where she would just play to hide and res the entire team. Yep, you saw that right. She resed her entire team. And then they changed it to where she could res twice. Once as her normal ability, and then if she popped Valkyrie, she could res again. And so, They've already nerfed Mercy's res several times, and honestly, I still think it's broken and the most annoying ability in the game, next to Kiriko's teleport through a wall, and then she also has Bell, but we'll get into that on another video. Reason number 3, she breaks DPS heroes. Ashe on release with the Mercy Pocket could one-shot any 200 HP hero on the roster until her damage was nerfed so that she would no longer be able to, which took Blizzard like a whole 2 years, but we won't get into that. And then let's think about Pharah. Pharah would honestly be a really balanced hero if Mercy didn't have to have the ability to permanently pocket her, and it would also teach lower SR players how to properly play Pharah, and in turn be less annoying for those lower SR players, because if Mercy couldn't hard pocket Pharah for an entire game, she wouldn't be able to constantly spam chokes while jiggle peeking behind cover, much like a Junkrat does, which is where the annoyance comes for the large majority of players. Sojourn can still one-tap any 200 HP hero with the damage boost, and she even used to be able to one-shot 250 HP heroes like Mei and Reaper with the damage boost before the Season 3 damage nerfs came in. All of this being said to show that DPS have to be balanced around the potential for Mercy to pocket them, which means Mercy has consistently broken the DPS category since her release. Reason number 4, and this one's going to get the Mercy Mafia after me, guys, so please pray for me. Keep me in your thoughts. She takes no skill to carry games. That being, Mercy gets an absurd amount of value while having to put out next to no input. What do I mean by that? Well, as I said earlier, Mercy carries games by enabling her DPS. And with Mercy, you just have to sit behind a wall, holding right click until your DPS takes damage, then left click, of course, whenever they do take damage. Occasionally hit E behind a wall when they happen to get one shot, whenever your DPS gets picked, and then all while only having to worry about getting flanked or dove by enemy flankers like a Tracer or a Genji or whatever. So the only skill you need on Mercy is awareness. Let's compare her to other supports. Take Brig for example. And now, a lot of people will say Brig doesn't take any mechanical skill either. And while you're right for the most part, she really doesn't. She needs a lot of game sense and needing to know how to position to get value out of her kit consistently. But Mercy, on the other hand, doesn't even need positioning. The only skill she needs is awareness of being flanked and of the teammates that are being dove and taking damage. So it's just the awareness. And it's not very hard to keep your mind on a flanking Tracer or Genji when you don't have to worry about cooldown management, landing skill shots, or your positioning. And then let's take a look at another support, that being Ana, which I feel is one of the best designed heroes in the game, just to play and play against. She hits all 3 fundamental skill checks in Overwatch, those 3 being cooldown management, mechanics, and positioning. And she also needs awareness like Mercy, but she has to do all of these simultaneously. You have to position yourself to land your sleeps and your nades, while worrying about being dove if you use them too early, all while having to be aware of those heroes that are going to dive you and if you need to save your cooldowns for those heroes. And Mercy doesn't need mechanics because the only mechanical part of her kit, that being her movement, is super easy to learn, guys. And she doesn't need cooldown management because her Guardian Angel is on a 1.5 to 3 second cooldown. She doesn't need positioning because her best playstyle is to sit the entire game behind cover and use Guardian Angel whenever you get dove or to save a teammate that takes damage. And that's why I think Mercy's broken. And we can't just complain to complain because that does absolutely nothing. Let's think about some actual solutions for this problem. Now, here's some of my suggestions for a Mercy rework. And so, if we think Mercy's res is an integral part of her kit, which it probably is in all honesty, my first idea would be to make it have a max cooldown where she can only res for that certain amount of time, that being like 4 or 5 seconds. It should be a set amount of time for 2 main reasons. One, it brings consistency, and there would be no more of these situations in overtime where Mercy can res like 15 seconds after. And the second reason being that I don't believe it's healthy for the game to need to force someone to camp the death marker for 10 seconds, because in 10 seconds you can lose the fight, in 5 seconds you can lose the fight. So 10 seconds is kind of insane to be able to have to camp that in order to prevent the res from being initiated. And another idea, which I don't think is the best honestly, is maybe make res have to have line of sight to where you have to be resing like looking at the death marker, where you won't be able to res through walls anymore, but in all honesty, that would prevent so many reses from happening. Like if you get in higher EOs at all, I don't even know if res would even be able to be used like ever. So that might not be a good idea, but just a thought. Another idea is we can make it to where she can only res when in her ultimate Valkyrie, because it's honestly unfair for a hero to have res every single fight when 81% of the fights are won by the team who gets the first pick. In Valorant, they actually have Sage's ultimate be her resurrect instead of just an ability. And lastly, with her staff. I genuinely can't think of any idea to replace her damage boost, even with it being as broken as it is, but my idea would be to somehow give her a resource meter similar to Mora, make it drain resources when you're pocketing one hero, forcing you to heal or damage boost a different teammate in order to charge your resource meter, and I feel like that would make it a lot more interactive for the Mercy player, and it would only increase the skill ceiling while making it a lot less annoying for DPS players to go into. But that's just an idea I think would have to be tested in some kind of experimental patch like Overwatch used to do, see how the entire community reacts and see how they feel about it. But have the devs even used the experimental mode in Overwatch 2 at all besides like the April Fool's patch? I don't know, maybe that was just an Overwatch 1 thing. And so those are the only suggestions I could think of over the few weeks that I spent writing this script. But if you have any ideas, feel free to leave a comment below. I would genuinely love to hear your thoughts, especially if you're a Mercy player, and tell me your thoughts on my ideas of the rework and why you might think I'm dumb. Just be nice in the comments, that's all I ask. And please, for the love of God, don't get me started on Kiriko. She's even worse.